So, welcome everybody uh, to this special event, an In Conversation with Loretta Smith, who is the author of Corpus in Extremis, a memoir. I'd just like to do a welcome. We respectfully acknowledge the wisdom of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their custodianship of the lands and waterways, the countries on which Spinifex press offices are situated are Jiru, Bunurong, Wurundjeri, Wadawurrung, Gundungurra and Noongar. We also acknowledge the many women throughout history who have fought for women's freedom and the freedom of lesbians, often at the cost of their lives. So just a moment of housekeeping. While we're talking, you will all be muted. The recording runs, it is being recorded, and the recording runs for 60 minutes, roughly. If you have questions, you can add them in the chat, which is on the side. Most people know how to do this stuff now. And if time, we can have some questions, or you can add them in the chat and we can come back to them. So I'm just going to begin with the very short bio of Loretta at the beginning of her book. Loretta Smith is a Melbourne-based writer. Her best-selling biography, A Spanner in the Works, The Extraordinary Story of Alice Anderson and Australia's First All-Girl Garage, was published in 2019. It has been optioned for a TV series and inspired the play Garage Girls, which performed to a sellout audience at La Mama Theatre in 2023. The play also toured regionally throughout Victoria in 2024 as part of the VCE playlist. For overseas viewers, that's the last year of secondary school in Australia. Corpus in Extremis, a memoir, is her second book. So welcome to you, Loretta. I'm
Susan,
really looking forward to having this conversation with you.
I'm actually a bit nervous. I don't know
Oh, that's normal. And it's perfectly okay. When you're nervous, you
why.
get better at things. So we are going to, I might actually just start without the PowerPoint, just with the first question. But you were born in 1961. Can you speak a little bit about your family background, your mother, your father, your siblings, and where you grew up, just in a very general sense?
Okay. I was born in Moonee Ponds, but then we moved to Aspendale, which was my parents' first house they built, and I did most of my growing up in Frankston. My parents are Harold and Lynette. My dad died suddenly. He was only 52 or 3 in 1983. My mum's still alive. She's just gone into aged care. I'm the eldest of 5, and I also have another sister with osteogenesis imperfecta, my genetic condition, and a nephew. And my other sister has got connective tissue disorder as well. We're not sure what it is at this stage, but she's coping with prolapses and things like that. And I've only just recently learned that all those connective tissue disorders are actually connected. So even though there are family members that don't have the condition, they have, variations on aspects of it, like hyperlaxivity. Yeah.
I'm actually going to stay away from the PowerPoint for the moment and ask you some questions because it's really nice to see your face, and we won't see that when the PowerPoint
That's
comes up.
absolutely fine.
So, as we will have some international viewers, can you say something about Moonee Ponds and Frankston, because they're quite different places in Melbourne, just to give people a sense of the kinds of suburbs they
Yes,
are?
well, Moonee Ponds is in the northwest, and it's a pretty upmarket suburb. I don't know if it was when I was born, probably not as much, but and Frankston now is quite a gentrified area because it is close to the beach. I think that's what's really made Frankston popular. But it was certainly a pretty rough place when we moved there. And I've always been reminded that it's partially my fault we ended up in Frankston, because my parents wanted to build in Mount Eliza, which is a very posh suburb on that southern peninsula. And I would have had to have walked on gravel and gone to a bus stop and be taken to school if we lived in Mount Eliza, and that wasn't something I could easily do. So we had to move to Frankston. Yeah.
Rachel, can you start sharing the PowerPoint now so we can have a look at a few of the first pictures of Loretta? So you can talk to we can just move them on. Just you tell Rachel when you want to move them on.
So you can see my parents there, and they were married the year before I was born. And this is outside, I think it's a Catholic church in Coburg. But I guess the important thing to say is that Mum is or was a dressmaker. She's very talented, and she made her own wedding dress there. So she was a beautiful seamstress when she could still sew.
Moving on.
And that's my christening. I love my mum's hat. They all wore hats then. And I think this was my dad's first car in the background, and I'm the firstborn. So my father was about 9 years older than my mother. So my mother was only 22 when I was born. And it must have been such a shock to them to discover that I wasn't quite, unquote, normal. But they didn't know that until I was 12 to 18 months old. But they look very happy there.
Yeah. Moving on.
And that's my father holding me in 1962. And this is in the backyard of the house in Moonee Ponds where they first rented. They hadn't bought a property at that stage. And my father came down from Queensland to take a job in Melbourne, where he was and remained a custom agent for the rest of his career.
Moving on.
So yes, I was a normal, healthy-looking baby, but at 12 months old, I fell out of my high chair. And for most children, they wouldn't fracture their skull, but I did. And my parents soon realised that wasn't all that was broken with me. So next slide, thanks. Yeah, I love this photo. This nurse is apparently the one that discovered there wasn't something quite right with me. I'm 2 years old and I'm in St Vincent's Hospital in Melbourne in 1963. So I'm 2 years old there. And it was that nurse, my mum thinks, that actually picked up that I had dislocated hips. She'd just come from training on hip dysplasia, and she went straight to the children's ward in St Vincent's and discovered that even though I had a bandage around my head because of my fractured skull, it was the fact that I had dislocated hips that caused me the most problems ongoing, because by the time they discovered it, it was too late to put them back in place, even though they tried very hard to do that, and had me in frog plaster with my feet up around my ears for, I think it was quite a while, months, if not years. So, yeah. And I can't imagine how old that nurse would be now. So I know Professor David Silence and his wife are actually watching this. So welcome to you both. And so osteogenesis imperfecta is a heritable syndrome characterised by one or more of the features of osteoporosis, which is brittle bones, leading to fractures, blue sclera, that's the whites of the eyes, impaired hearing, defective dentition, which I don't have, dentition, yep, hyperlaxability present throughout life. There's a wide variability in the presence and severity of the features among patients. And Professor David Silence was the first professor in the world to actually pick up that there were different types of this condition. And they keep adding different types. I think there might be up to 7 or 9 now, but there were 4 that Professor Solence set up to explain it. Not so if you had say type 1, doesn't mean that you were the best or the worst. It was just the type of collagen defect you had with this, because it is essentially a defect, collagen defect. I'm type 4, which is you can be relatively mild with that. And yes, I have a relative mild version of this, but because they didn't pick up my dislocated hips, and you end up with low bone density and lax joints, and your bones can bend and break, that caused a whole lot of problems for me, particularly when I started trying to walk. Next slide, thanks. So this is me and Mum in the backyard at Moonee Ponds, I think on the other side from where my father was. And you can see what I mean about the plaster. They were to try and set my hips in place, and it was changed and readjusted every 6 weeks. So there are photos of me as well with my feet literally up around my ears. I don't really remember the plaster being put on, but I remember it being patched up by my mother on the kitchen table. And you can see the way my mum's standing, that even though she doesn't officially have this condition, she's leaning back into herself, and her knees are bent a bit backwards. And my father was like that as well. And as my mother got older, she's ended up with severe osteoporosis, and she's always had hearing issues. And she's completely deaf in one ear because the hammer actually broke in her ear. So it's highly likely she had what I recently discovered is a mosaic inherited type. And my understanding of that is that you don't have every aspect of the condition, or not every cell contains that condition. So my mother grew up in the country in Euroa in central Victoria, and she played a lot of netball and was very sporty, like a lot of country kids were. And she used to land on her bum on the netball court, and she never broke a thing. So it's a very interesting condition. Next slide, thanks. So this is my 3rd birthday in 1964. So this would be on June the 2nd. I think my mum actually took me to this photograph studio on my actual birthday. And this was when I'd just come out of plaster. So you can imagine being in plaster for so long, it protects your bones, but it also makes your muscles very, your muscle strength disappears. So you're at risk of further fractures. They didn't have the sort of technology they've got now where they can actually sort of fix your bones from the outside with pins that go in, that sort of external fixtures. So yeah, I was forever, tripping or just falling, or when I was very young, just rolling off a very thin mattress my mum put out in the backyard to have me get a little bit of sun on my lily-livered limbs. So it was pretty exciting that I was out of plaster. It didn't last long. And yes, that was the fashion of the day, to have a top knot like that with a red ribbon in it. And my mum, being a seamstress, she designed and made most of the clothes that I wore, including this little outfit. Also in the background, it's like an olive green, and I think I'm sitting on a lamb's wool rug, and if I'd been a baby, I probably would have been put on it naked, like those photos that you see. And the photographer, apparently, according to my mum, wanted to put some pretty background, maybe pale pink or even blue. And mum said no, she wanted something that was stronger looking and that was more close to the colour of my eyes, which are hazel. So that was my mother's decision to have the photo look like that. Next slide. Thanks, Rachel. And this is the first house that my parents built in Aspendale, which was further down south near the beach. And this was my brother, who was born in 1964, no, 5, early 1965. So we're actually 4 years apart. And we're in the backyard there. And you can see I'm wearing quite built up shoes, which is unusual for a young child, but they were actually trying to hold my inner ankles up because everything was so flexible. I was actually standing with sort of on the side with my feet. So they were trying to correct that. And you can probably see from the way I'm trying to run that my legs don't look quite even because one ended up, the hip went into a socket that made itself further up from the original socket, and the left hip, the right hip, was a floating hip, which means it wasn't any socket at all, and it was my gluteal muscles holding it together. So it wasn't the best thing to stand on, but nevertheless, I walked and I tried to run. And of course, Mum made that outfit that I'm wearing.
And you're obviously able to be quite active, you know, with the tricycle and everything.
Yes, well, of course, they didn't want me falling off a bicycle
No.
with training wheels because heavens knows what I'd fracture.
Mm.
And the school, the Catholic school, St. Louis de Montfort's, was literally down the road. It felt like a long way to me, but I'm sure it wasn't. And they specifically got me a tricycle to encourage a bit of independence, but to also strengthen those legs up. So
how was school at that time? I mean, were you ever bullied because you
yes,
were
I was
different?
teased and bullied, particularly by the boys,
Mm.
because there was no one else with a disability as far as I was aware at the school. But there was a point very early on before I went to school that they were considering, the medical profession was considering putting me in a special school because I was so quote unquote fragile. But thank goodness they didn't, because I would have been lumped in with children with intellectual disabilities and all sorts. And, you know, I was kind of bright kid and I loved learning at school. But we had teachers that weren't particularly able to control the class. And I remember there was one teacher, Miss Cusack, with she's sort of a frail, young-looking thing with long red hair, and I think she didn't cope with us. And of course, the boys would play up and do silly things like, at those days you'd get free milk, in little milk bottles or cartons every morning. That was a government initiative to make sure we got our calcium. And the boys would suck on a straw and then squeeze it out their nostrils and do awful things like that, and making a lot of noise. And so I tended to shut down a little bit because I was all very aware that if I got bumped into or was around someone loud and energetic, it wasn't safe for me. But this poor teacher in particular, she kept running off to the toilets and she'd tell us we're not allowed to make a noise. And of course, it was awful because she was away for up to half an hour at each time, and she's probably terrified that she'd get found out. But I suspect she was just running off to the toilets and crying, poor thing. Yeah. So yeah, it was a mixed bag, but overall, I did like school. Yeah, and when I had fractured legs and I couldn't walk, I would go to school in a giant pram, and the kids would take it in turns to have sort of run me around with being raced around the school. I thought that was quite a novelty. Yeah, that was a lot of fun until sometimes they pushed too hard and then I'd fall out. But I don't remember breaking anything at that stage. Mm. So this is my first communion. And, you know, if you know anything to do with the Catholic Church, you're kind of set up as a little bride of Christ, even at 6 or 7 or whatever. And I was all done up, and Mum's very religious, so she was very proud of me doing my first communion. And you can see she wanted me in pretty patent leather black shoes, but you can actually see how I'm leaning on the inside of my feet and that my knees aren't level because my hips aren't in the right place. And as a consequence of that, my pelvis ended up being quite twisted as well. And from there on up, I ended up with scoliosis in my spine, and on it went. But I don't remember being in a terrible lot of pain at that young age. And I don't remember being given pain medication as such. And every now and again, my left hip that was partially had, created its own socket would partially dislocate, and it'd be very painful. And sometimes I had to be picked up from school and taken home, and it would fix itself eventually. But yeah, it wasn't an easy life. It's not an easy life having this condition. Yeah.
And I was thinking about this. There's this picture of you wearing calipers. I mean, I suppose
Yes.
After the kids have run you around the school, the calipers was just another side of things, really, wasn't it? But lots of kids had calipers back then because of the
polio.
The polio. Sorry, I was just having a moment of blank.
Well, at my school, I was the only one with calipers, and I don't remember being overly teased by that. And they were really trying to keep my ankles up, and also because everything's so lax, I'm quite flat-footed. And it actually worked. I think I was only in them for 18 months, 2 years at the most, because what would happen, of course, because everything else was crooked, it fixed my feet, because you can't see it, but there's an iron bar on the inside that strapped me up like that. And there was a piece of leather that went around the boot to really hold me, my foot upright. But of course, that's when my knees, my patellas would start dislocating, because they weren't positioned in the right spot either. And that was just awful. And I remember I learnt piano as a young child because I couldn't run around and play sport. And I thought that would strengthen my fingers as well and give me an interest that was sedentary in terms of being seated. But I remember going to a piano exam, and I had to go into the city, and I was with my mother, and we were walking down Swanston Street, and this was before Swanston was blocked off to cars, and I dislocated my knee then, and it's awfully painful. But if you straighten my leg, because everything was so loose, it would pop back in, and of course my whole knee would swell up, and I was in greater danger of more dislocation. And no one tried to help my mother. There was a row of taxis near us, and not one of them got out of the car. And this man actually stopped and ran across the road and helped me up and made sure that my mother and I were okay. And he told the taxi drivers off. But I still went to my piano exam. Can't believe I did that, but I did. You can see my brother there, and the next child that my parents had was Elizabeth, and she's sitting on my mother's knee. And we're actually outside the block in Frankston where my parents were building their second home, and it was in a court. So we were moving on up in the world.
And then you went to secondary school?
Yep. So there I am, and this was at Frankston, and it was the Stella Maris Ladies College. And I used to walk there with quite a heavy bag, and they didn't have backpacks then. So you had heavy textbooks. Like my old biology book was, quite a few centimetres thick. And it was hard work, and most people just threw it, over their shoulders on one side, but probably wouldn't have been very helpful for me. And I had to actually walk up a hill. It was in McMahon's Road, and we were actually taught at the old golf club. That was quite a fancy golf club in its day, but that's where the nuns lived. And we used to have our, what do you call it when you bring all the school together? Just gone blank on that.
Assembly.
We had our assembly in the ballroom, and it was one of those floors that bounced for, there's a name for that too, for them having dances and things. And it had a little tower and everything. It was quite cute. But a few years in, it became co-ed, and we had the Marinus brothers, and they built extra parts of the school on that land. So, yeah, there I was. I was very fashionable with my long hair, parted in the middle, and we always pulled out bits of hair at the front, so you had little curly bits at the front. And I really wanted short hair, but Mum had this idea that no girl was allowed to cut their hair until they were 15. So I think I was in my probably second year of high school, so it wasn't until the year after that I was actually allowed to cut my hair short.
My mother went the other way. I wasn't allowed to grow my hair until I was about 16.
That's fascinating.
So
what
here
was his
you are.
logic?
Who knows? Who knows? So on a tram, you've left school by now, I take it?
No, 1978, I was in Form 5, year 11, and I went to a designated music school, which I had a lot of fun with these people, and it's the first time I'd met gay people, gays and lesbians, and the two men getting on and off the tram, holding on the tram there, both of them died of AIDS in the mid-60s, mid-80s, around 86, I think it was. So that was very, very sad and shocking. But the designated music school was at McKinnon High. So I had to actually get on a train and I had to learn a second instrument. God knows why I decided to learn cello. I actually wanted to learn the saxophone, but I had to have a classical instrument that could be used in an orchestra. So I had to carry this bloody cello on the train as well. I can't remember how far I had to walk, but I had to get up really, really early, do a bit of cello practice and get to McKinnon. But this was also the year that I joined the Melbourne Youth Choir, and all of us, one I think was in that choir. There might have been two of us. And I just joined the year after they came back from England. They actually did a singing tour. So I was so sorry to miss out on that. And the woman in the beret, she became my first girlfriend.
That's nice.
But I've changed her name to protect her privacy in the memoir.
And after you left school, you went to where?
I went to what was then Melbourne State College, which became Melbourne College of Education, and now it's part of Melbourne University, and there I studied a Bachelor of Education, focusing on the arts.
I went to Melbourne Teachers College, as it was called, some years earlier.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, this is my 21st birthday at home, and of course our house had the, you had to have an internal brick wall if you were groovy then. So, and this dress was silk, and my mother made it for my aunt, my mother's sister, to wear as a bridesmaid at her wedding. And believe it or not, it's based on the same pattern of my mother's wedding dress. So I felt very privileged to be able to wear that dress. And as thin as I wasn't as thin as my aunt and my mother at that point, because they were quite poor, and I think they basically lived on baked beans. So I remember it being quite tight, and it started to tear under the armpits by the end of the night because, you know, it had been around for over 20 years. So, yes. And I think that's one of my teachers behind me there. Yeah. But it was a fun party. And like, I don't know if this even happens these days, but you get the key to society or something. So that's the key that I got on holding.
Just take a few steps back just in terms of this, because I remember at one stage in the book that you were in hospital for a very long period, and I can't remember how old you were, but I think late, like 10, 11, 12, that sort of time.
Yes, from about 12 months onwards, till I remember having to go into hospital when I was in primary school, in prep and first grade. And up until recently, I had all the letters that the school kids wrote for me, wrote a letter for me while I was in hospital. So I got that sort of positive attention, which was lovely. But yeah, I was 9 years old when they sent me to the Children's Hospital. Otherwise, I went to St Vincent's Hospital in the city because they wanted to increase my calcium, and they were experimenting with me. And there's a whole chapter in the book
Mm.
in the memoir where I go through what happened at that time, but I was only in there at that time for 3 weeks. And of course, you can't increase calcium by having a drink with calcium in it. And OI, osteogenesis imperfecta, you don't actually have a calcium defect, you have a collagen defect. So it didn't do anything for me, but I suppose at least they tried. But yeah, I was in and out of hospital a lot. This is my younger sister, Alexis, trying to look super cool. And here I am looking super cool in my first car.
Absolutely. With your new
So
car.
the 80s. And my father helped me purchase that car, but I did put something towards it. And of course, not every child got a car. We weren't that wealthy. We were kind of lower middle class. But for me, it was very important to have a car. And before that, I had a very secondhand, it was older than me, a little mini miner that came from somewhere. But this was my first new car, and it was a Daihatsu. And not many of my friends had a car. Yeah, so that was lovely. But sadly, at the end of that year was when my father suddenly died. So that really changed the whole family dynamic then, because my mum was only in her mid-40s and she more or less had a breakdown, and I was living away from home, of course, being at university, because this is in Frankston. Yeah, I really needed a car to get around. And I was living with my aunt, and then I was house sharing, as you do, all that sort of stuff. So I wasn't really at home, but my 3 younger sisters were. And my brother at that point had joined the Navy to be in the Navy band, because he went to a tech school and was in a band, and he learnt trombone and things like that. And I've always been envious of him, because I wish I'd gone to a tech school, but I went to the academic Catholic girls' school, and they didn't even teach any kind of music there. I had to have private piano lessons and, yeah, all that stuff. So, yeah, so that's 1984 when I graduated, and that's a dreadful photo. Me and my graduation, but I didn't think so at the time. That was just back in the day what you wore. And this is me playing Miss Prism in The Importance of Being Earnest. And I really loved that. That was an extracurricular play that I had to audition for, but I did major in drama and music and film criticism, and I had a fabulous time. But under that skirt, I actually had to wear elastic braces around my knees, because the last thing I wanted to have happen was to have my knee dislocate while I was on stage. So even though I loved acting and found it far more enjoyable than being put on a stage with a piano, that terrified me. I hated performing in front of people. So I really found something I particularly enjoyed there, but no one knew what I had under my skirt, just to make me feel a bit more comfortable. So yes, that was my college.
You went travelling, Phil.
Sorry, what was that, Susan?
Sorry, you went travelling fairly soon.
Yeah.
You went travelling. You're in Japan.
Yeah. Well,
How did you manage that? I mean,
I had a boyfriend at the time.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah, some of us lesbians went through that stage, and I just always had itchy feet, and I always wanted to travel. And my boyfriend was too afraid to come with me. He was a bit of a nervous ninny. He just liked his comfort, so he wasn't an avid traveller. And I knew someone that I'd worked with that had gone over there to teach, and you could actually get a working visa if you taught English. And so I went over there to teach English as a second language, and I taught everything. These are my adult students, you can see down below, and above were my kindergarten students. So I travelled everywhere on bicycle or on bullet trains, and it was absolutely exhausting because I worked 6 days a week, but I loved every minute of it. But with all the walking that I did, I ended up the hip that wasn't in a socket, ended up twisting and going further up into my body. So by the end of that year, I came home quite sick, but I had a fabulous time. But in those days, we've all got trolleys, wheels on our cases now, travel cases. Heavens knows why it took so long for people to think of that. I had to carry everything that I wanted to take with me in a backpack. So no wonder my hips started going on me. But look, maybe that would have happened anyway. But I ended up with chronic fatigue syndrome. I realised when I came back home, and it was very early days around that, a lot of doctors didn't believe me. But anyway.
Now you have to tell us about Julianne.
Oh, yes. Well,
who is Julianne?
Julianne was the love of my
Very
life.
important.
Yeah. And we had, this was way before equal marriage in 1996. And her cousin lived in New South Wales in Cremorne. So we went up, and I actually went up for Mardi Gras because I was in the Melbourne Gay and Lesbian Chorus, and we performed at the Sydney Town Hall, which was a heap of fun with all the other choirs around the country that turned up. And so we had a special kind of ceremony where we exchanged rings, and that was in Cremorne. And then afterwards, Julian's cousin and her husband and their son took us out to lunch on Manly Beach. And so that's a photo of us on Manly Beach. And she really was the love of my life. But unfortunately, we're only together for 5 years because she ended up dying of breast cancer. So I still think of her most days. It's just one of those things, but it was very sad because she was my person,
Yeah.
That's what happened.
As I recall, you moved to the country.
That's right.
Malden?
She'd recently bought and was doing up an old miner's cottage in Malden, which is not far from Castlemaine, and about half an hour out of south of Bendigo. So I ended up working in Bendigo and Castlemaine, and and I lived there for 7 years. I tried to stay in her cottage for a couple of years after she'd gone, just to see where I wanted to be, but I really was a city girl, so I ended up coming back. Yeah, so that's Julian. Not long before she died. She actually died in March in 2000. So yeah, beautiful soul. Have we got time to go back to the previous slide? Or?
Oh, yes,
yeah,
of course. So you went to New York.
Yeah, went to New York.
The gospel singers.
I went on a gospel tour with Tony Backhouse. He was a very talented musician that focused on gospel music, and he used to compose as well. And every year he made contacts with African American people that loved him in America. So we were very fortunate. People came from all over the world, and we met in Los Angeles and did a gospel tour where we actually went to those African American churches and sang with them. I hope someone's keeping an eye on the time. I've got no idea.
Maybe I.
So that was the tour. So we were in Central Park there, and I made some good friends there. And even though I was walking with a limp and I didn't need to use any aids at that stage, and we walked everywhere because that's what you do, or you get a cab, or you take the subway. And I take the subway on my own. I felt very safe. In New York, people would say it was dangerous, but it kept you alert. You wouldn't stay on a train in a place on your own. You'd kind of move into the next carriage or whatever, and your sixth sense would tell you not to walk down certain streets, particularly if it was dark. But this is us really having a lovely time in what was the Gold Rush Bar in New York City, and we were clapping and singing along, and that's me in the front there on the left-hand side. So that was just fabulous. And I actually stayed, I think the tour went for 3 weeks, and I was there for a month. So I had another week on my own and went traveling and just absolutely had a ball. Yeah, and got very fit. I was all muscle by that time.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, so maybe go on now to Ireland in the next one. And you went.
So I came back to Julian, and she picked me up from the airport at the end of 1999, and I sensed something was wrong then. And not long after that, she was between her being diagnosed and passing away was only 3 months. So it was a very short stint. Now, Ireland, 2002, I booked with a friend and everything. We, organised a car. We took a month travelling around Ireland, and it was fantastic, except just before we were leaving, I had pain in one of my legs. I had an x-ray, and it seemed that my femur was bending a bit, but it didn't bring up anything. And I actually took with me something that was quite expensive, but it was called some sort of bone stimulator that was meant to strengthen your bones. And so I actually did this trip on elbow crutches, but I managed to get most of the crutches out of the photos, so it looks like I'm just standing normally. And I'm I'm in front of Blarney Castle there, I think, and there was 100 spiral stone steps that I managed to go up on elbow crutches. But I wasn't going to kiss the Blarney Stone. I'd had enough just getting to the top, and it looked filthy, and there was a man there with a dirty rag. He'd wipe it every time someone would kiss the Blarney Stone for good luck, and I wasn't going to go there. And gosh, I can't remember where this other photo was, but ancient stuff, 5,000 years old, and you could walk into this, and
it
it's
might
just
be Knowth.
Yeah.
It might be Knowth, Knowth.
No,
it's not that one. No, okay.
No, it isn't that one. But there's a few of them around, all made of stone, and the sun comes in at a certain time of the day and lights up certain things. So I found all of this far more fascinating than the music, even though I was into music, because I honestly think the best Irish musicians are in Australia.
And then pretty soon after that, you found out about Alice Anderson. So you finished up writing a book about her, but what impact did it have on your life, finding out about her? And you met Mary as well, and a whole lot of things.
Oh, Liz took me on an incredible journey where I went down so many rabbit holes. And I always enjoyed writing, and I'd always written, but I really hadn't had anything published. So it took a while to actually find out how to get published, and I eventually got an agent, and I was very happy with the results. But I first discovered her in 2008 when I read a biography of Edna Walling, who is the famous landscape designer and gardener, and she was in the same social circles as Alice Anderson, and in the car, in front of the car on the left-hand side is Alice. She's got two other garage girls there, all in a uniform. She made them look like very attractive as chauffeurs because she was competing with the men, and they're standing in front of her Hupmobile. I don't know exactly where that photo was taken.
What period is this that you're talking about, Loretta?
This is the very early 1920s or even late 1910s. She actually started her business just after World War I, but she didn't have her garage that she designed and had built, and that opened in, when was it? 1919. So, yeah, but she'd started the business before then, just touring around with people. And that's a formal photo there of an early uniform. She tried a few uniforms on. And, yeah, I discovered her after reading that biography by Sarah Hardy, and we ended up becoming friends. Because Alice died in 1926 and she was only 29, but she'd achieved so much in that time. She was an entrepreneur, she was an inventor, she began so many things and invented so many things that, of course, if she was a man, she would have been a household name. I'm not, a petrol head by any means, but when I read about this young woman, and I had never heard of her, and I thought, why haven't I heard of this woman? She sounds amazing. And I Googled her, and not much came up at all. But I ended up connecting with a Dr. Mimi Colligan that had interviewed garage girls in the 1980s, and she just wrote an article on her. And she knew about Alice because her mother had learned to drive at the Alice Anderson Motor School in the 1930s, which was after Alice had died. But the garage kept going nonetheless up until World War 2 and a little bit beyond. So they did go on without her, but it was never as successful. But a lot of people said to me, you'll never find enough material to write her biography because she died so long ago. But then my last job before I was forced to retire in 2009 because of my disability, and I actually accidentally, of course, fractured my spine. And it wasn't a bad fracture, but it was quite painful, and I couldn't go back to my job because it meant helping people in and out of cars and moving wheelie walkers around because I was an aged care case manager. So I had to take 3 months off, I think, and I just thought, I'm not going back. I'm eligible for the disability pension. I'm absolutely exhausted. I'm just going to go down a rabbit hole with Alice Anderson. And I was determined, and I didn't really even know how to do research. I haven't done a master's or a PhD, but I taught myself, and I taught myself how to do the sort of research that you needed to do. And I chased down, it was very difficult to chase down relatives of garage girls because at this stage, all the garage girls had passed away and Alice's siblings had passed away as well. So I caught up with some of Alice's relatives, but Mary Conn, who was one of my clients when I was a case manager, she had Alzheimer's and she just kept going back into the past. And one day out of the blue, this is about 3 weeks after I'd read the biography of Edna Walling, Mary just said in her kitchen, oh, my mother was the chauffeur and the mechanic of the family, driver and mechanic of the family, because she worked for Alice Anderson. And you can imagine how I felt. I think I smashed one of her cups on the kitchen floor and said, what? And then she started telling me stories, and she met Alice Anderson because initially her mother had to take her to the garage because she didn't have anyone to look after young Mary because her mother's husband had come back from World War I and was absolutely a mess. And they ran an orchard in Glen Waverley when it was still country and they needed more money. So to actually meet someone that had met Alice and talk to me about her and how she used to, little Mary used to ride in the back seat of the car sometimes with Alice being a chauffeur and picking up clients. And I think Alice was giving me a message that I was the one to tell her story. So,
That's really nice.
yeah.
I'm keeping a bit of an eye on things, and you've done all these other travel. But I think I want to go to where you had to have a spinal fusion. And why did that have to happen, and what were the challenges and benefits? And
so very briefly, my mother decided to take me to Vietnam because I was getting depressed that I wasn't getting my book published. So she thought this was a good idea. It's probably not the best idea, but it was lovely traveling. So the spinal fusion I had in 2017, and I was told then, you can see part of it there, and other bits and pieces, I'm at least 50% metal now, either replaced by metal or my bones having metal wrapped around them. This is the most severe operation you can have on a human body. And the surgeon I went to said, you have to have this done before you turn 60 if you want it done because your body won't cope with it. All the other surgeries I've had, and there were many and they were pretty major, he said they were maybe 3 out of 10. This is a 9 out of 10 surgery, and we do it in 2 stages, and you could be at risk of going blind or getting dementia from the surgery. Like, what? I knew there's risks, but you have to lie down for so long, face down, that's the blood pressure to your eyes could turn you blind. And also you had to be under a deep anesthesia for so long that it could affect your brain. But if I wasn't able to have this surgery, I wouldn't be alive now, because by the time I got to this point, because I was walking around on wonky hips, even though they'd been replaced by then and revised, the scoliosis in my spine had got so bad that even when I was in a fetal position in bed with a pillow in between my knees and doped up to the eyeballs on pain medication, on opioids. I was in absolute agony. And when I stood, I was in terrible, terrible agony. Not something you could actually live with. So I would have found a way to exit this planet if I couldn't have it done. It was a horrendous surgery, and you can read about it in the memoir, that I did survive it. And the thing was, you had to pass the bone density and certain bone density and bone mass to even have this surgery. So not everyone with OI could have this surgery. But the reason my bone density was enough was my spine was full of arthritis. So if there's anything positive about having arthritis in your joints, that's it. So it's very awkward. Spines are meant to move. It's certainly not comfortable, but as the surgeon predicted, it could take away up to 70% of my pain, and it pretty much did that. I do have more pain now because, you know, my body will keep deteriorating, but it was a lifesaver in that respect. But it was a hell of a thing to go through, and that spinal fusion goes from my pelvis to my shoulders. Yeah. So
yeah, go on.
Still traveling, and I'm with my partner Carolyn at this stage, and my bucket list was to go to Antarctica. So even though this was only the year after I'd had a spinal fusion and I had to walk on crutches, but, you know, nothing was going to stop me because you'd never know what was going to happen next to my body. So we organised a trip, and unfortunately we missed the lined up flights to actually fly to South America to get on the ship to go to Antarctica, because there was an unseasonable weather event in Sydney, and they had to cancel the flight. So we were forced to stay overnight in Sydney, and it meant we had more time in South America. I loved it. Carolyn was very dramatic, saying we never got to Antarctica. But I think I was saved by that because we met other people that had gone on the trip, because we were travelling one way and they were kind of travelling the other way. And they went on the same trip, and they said it was unseasonable weather, again, climate change, where the Drake Passage that you have to go through to get to Antarctica, they call it the Drake Shake, because it can be quite choppy. There were up to 10-metre waves. So it was probably very unsafe, because if I fractured my neck, I could become a quadriplegic. And I actually bought a neck brace to wear just so that wouldn't be a possibility, although it still might have happened. And there was actually extra snow in Antarctica, and what they did with the passengers, you could choose to go out on a little boat and go over to camp on the ice. And I wouldn't have done that, but there'd been so much snow that a couple did do that, or a few people did do that. And one man actually stepped on the ice and his leg went right down and he fractured his kneecap. So I think I was not meant to go on that trip.
I think so.
We had a fantastic time.
Yeah.
And I went to Galapagos Islands. It was just a brilliant trip.
But you said to me earlier that you wanted to read a little bit from your book. So because we've got about 5 minutes left.
Right. Okay.
It would be good to do that.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Thank you. So I've decided to read the chapter called The Muscularity of the Heart. And the subheading is Finding My Humans, Pulse Points of Love. I was 10 years old the first time I was told I was sexy. One of the school teachers had devised a musical performance following a trip to the Philippines. She had us all darken our skin in a bath of Condy's crystals and dress in Philippine fluffy blouses and long skirts, and we did a traditional dance amongst 2 long wooden sticks being clapped rhythmically on the ground. I must have looked quite exotic with my brown curls and hazel eyes and my skin awash with fake melanin. The teacher had made the whole process sound so exciting. We were all sucked in. She'd left on a jet plane, travelled across the ocean, and returned with a bag of cultural accoutrements from a place we'd never heard of, where dark-skinned people danced in the streets and were perpetually happy. And she told me, her face broad with enthusiasm, that I looked sexy. What does that mean, sexy? I asked, with all the innocence of a sheltered child kid at a Catholic primary school run by the nuns in the early 70s. I'd heard years later that one nun was so sheltered herself that she had to ask what fart meant. The teacher smiled at my confusion and her eyes laughed. Well, it means you look very lovely, she said. On the night of the school performance, I awkwardly hopscotched barefooted in and around the moving sticks, trying to avoid being clapped on the ankles as they came together. I'd already collected a few bruises in rehearsals, but of course the Condis crystals disguised the marks, despite it slipping from my skin onto my puffy blouse like brown skid marks. I wonder if any of the adults considered the possibility that clapping sticks could have given me fractures. Luckily that didn't happen, but my hips hurt with the movement. I couldn't let the audience down though, and especially the teacher, who I now also considered sexy. I soldiered on and probably would have hopscotched amongst those sticks all night if she'd asked me to. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, I can't recommend Loretta's book enough. I mean, it is an incredible story. I remember the chapters where you're talking about the level of pain that you experienced, and I kind of almost felt that viscerally. But also your incredible ability to survive that and being laid up in bed in hospital for months. And, you know, I mean, I'd have been bored shitless. And you probably
I was
would.
drugged to the eyeballs, so I couldn't even be bored. But the worst, I think, was when I had to be in traction on my back for 9 weeks. So not only was I bedridden, I couldn't even turn in the bed. That was terribly difficult.
But the story, you come through with such strengths, you know, inner strength and so forth. And then, you know, you go to South America and Vietnam and you do these, and you do all this travel often on your own as well. And I was bowled over by the book, and I'm so impressed by you and your ability.
Thanks, Susan.
Just
one of the things that I've always say to my mother, the best thing she did was she didn't coddle me as a child.
Yeah.
Very she important. Made me feel, she'd say to me, but Loretta, you're not normal, you can't do that, or don't try and do that. But she never held me back, and I had as normal a childhood as I could possibly have with this condition.
Well, look, I can't thank you enough for coming and doing this. Does anybody have a question for Loretta before we finish, although we'll probably finish the recording at this point? Colleen.
I just wanted to say, it's sort of talking about what Loretta did, but it's also what she's doing now. I mean, those of us in Melbourne just love listening to her radio broadcast where she interviews authors, and in honesty, the work she has to do in getting hold of them and researching and putting it on and coping with the people at the Pride Centre. And I've just seen Loretta do that in between such incredible bouts of pain and hospital, where I've wondered if she's going to get out of bed or out of the hospital. And then next day, she's either doing the broadcast or she's at some library speaking. I mean, you're just amazing, Loretta, and you know you're a huge inspiration to me.
Oh, so thanks, Colleen. Thanks, Colleen, for that.
Are there any other comments, questions you want to get in now before we finish the session? Renata.
Yeah, well, I just, I'm feeling inspired by Colleen, what you just said, and I just want basically to add and say exactly the same, Loretta. You are just, it's incredible, reading your book and then hearing you talk, and then what Colleen just said, what you're doing now. Honestly, you are really an inspiration. And, Colleen and I, we have our we turned octogenarians last year, just for all of you you should know that
Yeah,
we are very old.
congratulations, yes.
Yes, absolutely. So we're 81 here. So we have our own pains, but every time when I have another bout and it hurts somewhere, I think of Loretta. I really think of you, and I thought, oh God, it's nothing that I have compared to you. And you don't seem to complain, Colin. So
Well, I just go into
Loretta,
my
it's just
lady cave when I'm not feeling too well, because, you know, you don't want to burden your family and friends. I go and get counselling for that.
Do you ever scream with rage or annoyance or of pain or something?
I get frustrated. And as I go along, there's things I can no longer do. So I can't walk unaided. I can't swim. I used to do 40 laps a few times a week in the pool, which is good for someone with my condition. But since the spinal fusion, I can't rotate my shoulders. In fact, the last surgery I had in October was a total shoulder replacement. There's not much more they can actually do for me. Most of my joints have been replaced at this point. That I can't ride a bike anymore because my left knee doesn't bend more than 80 degrees. And I can't just go for a stroll. I've got mobility scooters, and NDIS, which I'm on, has been a blessing for me. And I'm lucky I got on it when I did, because I'm 65 this year, and 65 and over, you can't go on NDIS, which have far more resources than my age care. You have to be in the my age care group. But if you start on NDIS, you stay on NDIS. So I'm very fortunate for that. So because I've had to deal with this from day one, you just learn how to deal with it, I guess. And I've always been a glass half full sort of person. So, you know, you either hang in there or you top yourself. Man, there's not much of an option, really.
I think we're going to have to finish here since we're already over time. But I can just only thank you, Loretta, A, for being born, B, for living through it all, C, for writing this book and also the Alice Anderson one, and D, for coming along tonight and sharing all of that with us. I mean, you know, you're amazing. So thank you very
much, Susan, and thanks for publishing me. I'm very happy to be with Spinifex.
Great
and there are a couple of chapters in the memoir that tell the backstory to me writing the Alice Anderson book, which, as you can imagine, was a bit of a roller coaster ride. So, yeah. Thanks very much. And thanks, everyone, for coming on.
Thank you.